Thank you very much for everyone for attending today. I'm going to talk about a global pandemic. And this is a pandemic that's lasted longer than COVID has and really shows no end in sight. And that is a pandemic of obesity. As you can see from the graph there, global obesity rate has tripled, more than tripled over the last 40 years. And it's now at about 15% globally. But countries such as the US, Mexico, New Zealand, and Australia are all over 30% and even over 42% in the US. And there's really two categories that we see out there. There's the graph on the left. These are more industrial type, more wealthy countries that had a fair amount of obesity 40 years ago, but their obesity has again continued to skyrocket over the last 40 years and up 186% over that time. And then you have countries, referred to a lot of times as developing countries, lower income tending to be. And 40 years ago, obesity was essentially non-existent in this group of countries. But again, their obesity is skyrocketing over 1,000% in that 40-year time period. So the point here is, regardless of country, obesity is a global issue. It's, the absolute values are different from country to country, but the rate continues to go up unsustainably. And so what are the implications of this? A couple I'll mention. A 600% increased risk of type 2 diabetes if someone has obesity, a 93% risk of dementia, and interestingly, if someone is obese at midlife, that's the #1 risk factor that they can modify in the US, and it's #2 in Australia. In terms of mortality, obesity increases all-cause mortality, 64%. In terms of COVID, we saw a lot of deaths in the senior group, 154% higher mortality for those over 65 who are obese. Cost, very important to actuaries. Someone who's obese is going to cost an insurer 52% more. If that person is severely obese, 74% more. So for risk-bearing entities, whether that's an insurer, government entity, something, whoever it is, we can have inadequate pricing, reserving, and unsustainable rate increases going forward, or tax increases in case of government plans. So there's really a lot of implications of this rapidly rising condition. So there's been a number of attempts over the years to address this, and I just want to address a few of them and talk about why haven't they worked. And so the first one is advice to count calories or to eat less, and we've all probably heard this from people. But, counting calories, if you ever tried it, it's very difficult. It's time-consuming. I mean, even if you're an actuary, it's very, very difficult to do that. In many cases, it's impossible. You don't have the data. There has been an attempt to put labels on packages and in restaurants and things like that, but they've done studies, and that hasn't influenced in any significant way the amount of calories consumed. And then a lot of the advice that's put out there by reputable organizations is really not understandable to the average person. For example, the World Health Organization talks about limiting energy from fats. The US dietary guidelines talk about limiting saturated fat to 10% of calories or consuming smaller portions. The average person on the street doesn't understand those terms, and even if you're a health educator, you might not understand those terms completely, what they mean. But bottom line here is telling somebody to eat less is not sustainable. It actually works against human nature. People need to be satisfied and not hungry to maintain anything long-term, especially the way they eat. Second strategy is eating more fruits and vegetables. We've all heard this. It's great advice. Absolutely, we should all do more of it. But it fundamentally does not address the underlying cause of obesity. In fact, fruit and vegetable consumption is up 30%, calories, is up 30% over the past 40 years. And so what it really does is provide an excuse for eating some of the obesity-causing food that's out there. You can say, you know, I can have this, whatever it is, piece of junk food. You know, I had an extra carrot for lunch, so it just kind of provides a cover to people. Number 3, eating less sugar. And again, to be clear, sugar, I'm not saying that's a health food, but it's not the issue here. Actually, global consumption of sugar, if you look at the data, it's only up 7% over the last 40 years. And it's actually a smaller proportion of the total diet that people eat than it was 40 years ago. And again, it kind of distracts from the main issue here, which is somebody's overall dietary intake. And probably the most telling statistic on this is, in the US anyway, sugar consumption has actually declined 15% over the past 20 years, and in that same time period, obesity is up 64%. So I don't think sugar is the issue here. Number 4 strategy that's been tried in terms of obesity is bariatric surgery. This is where they go in, they essentially make your stomach smaller so you can't you know, eat any more food. There's a lot of complications with this surgery. They have to go in a lot of times and redo things because it doesn't work. There is a small chance of death. It's very expensive, so it's really not accessible to a lot of people. And bottom line, it's ineffective. They looked at long-term studies after 5 years, and of the excessive weight that people had at the beginning of the surgery, only 40% of it stayed off. So after all this surgery and pain and side effects, it really doesn't work. Number 5, probably the most popular advice to reverse obesity is to exercise more. Everyone should do that. Let's all do some more exercise, but again, it doesn't address the root cause. The statistic that I found very interesting is that the levels of exercise that are insufficient, that really hasn't changed in about 20 years, but over that same time period, obesity is up 50%. So exercise levels really haven't changed, but obesity up 50% since then. And really, when you step back and look at what people are eating, there is not enough time in the day to burn off the calories that some of the things that people are eating. So, you know, steak, cheese pizza, grilled chicken sandwich, you have to walk, you know, over an hour and to burn those off. Most people, you know, eating multiple of these a day. So, you know, it just, from a math problem, it doesn't compute. And then there's this new area of research that's coming out, and it's very exciting, and it shows that even if someone could exercise that much, after an initial transitional period, humans burn about the same number of calories regardless of their physical activity levels. And this research is called constrained total energy expenditure. And what happens is the body actually conserves its energy if you do a lot of exercise, so it kind of shuts down a little bit and you know, compensates for that. And what they did was to kind of prove this, they looked at hunter-gatherer societies where people are out foraging for food all day and bringing it back to the camp and cooking and being very active and you know, doing everything that most of us in Western societies and more wealthier countries don't do. You know, we're sitting in front of a computer all day and on our phones and that type of thing. And what they showed is these hunter-gatherer societies burned about the same number of calories that similar-sized individuals in Western societies did. So bottom line is, increasing daily activity through exercise will ultimately have little effect on the calories burned each day. So if none of those common strategies have worked, what is a potential solution that we can talk about? Well, I like to focus on the root cause of problems, and it seems to be the issue is excess calories. The calories that are available to all of us, this is on a worldwide basis, the data is, they've increased 22% over the past 40 years. And in fact, obesity and the body mass index are almost perfectly correlated. So as calories go up, you see the obesity and the body mass index go up right with it. We have correlation coefficients approaching 1. So where are these calories coming from? What's driving this? Well, if we look at the statistics, they're coming from oils and animal products, 90% increase and a 40% increase. As I mentioned earlier, fruits and vegetables up 30%. Obviously that's not the cause, and sugar and grains, a modest increase. So when we talk about oils, these are used in a lot of processed foods, and restaurants really love to kind of throw those on there. They have 884 calories per 100 gram serving. So these are really essentially pure fats that are being consumed by many people in some of these processed foods. And then you have your animal-based foods. You can see there beef is actually down quite a bit, but that's been overcompensated for with chicken, processed meat, and cheese. And those have lower calories than oils per serving, but still very high. And compared to some of your typical plant-based foods, fruits and vegetables, broccoli at 34, apples 52. So you can see how eating these foods really drives the obesity pandemic. And to really kind of drill that home, I want to talk about this concept of calorie density. And this graph shows the stomach filled with 500 calories of different types of food. And so on the left, you have the oils that I mentioned, the cheese, the meat, your animal products. With 500 calories of food, the stomach is really not filled up at all. So essentially, you're still hungry at that point, and so you need to keep eating to satisfy yourself. Whereas on the right, more of your plant-based foods with 500 calories, you're essentially filled up. You couldn't put any more food in there, even if you wanted to. So this leads to what I call the obesity spiral. And so as the proportion of the diet based on animal products and oils increases, the amount of calories needed to feel satisfied increases. So this is really what we see bared out in the data. People are putting on the calories to satisfy themselves. So to really address the fundamental underlying issue of the obesity pandemic, a focus on more of the plant-based foods, the right side of the graph, will really bring this down. And so you may say, well, that's quite a bit different than most people eat, and that's kind of foreign to me, and I'll just be hungry all the time and have to eat strange things. Well, that's really not true. A dietary pattern based on whole plant-based foods actually can look very much like this. And I think probably most of us have seen these foods before: pancakes, pasta, pizza, burgers, burrito bowl, even brownies and other nice desserts. So these foods that you see here were all prepared with minimally processed plant-based foods from grains, beans, vegetables, and fruits. They exclude all oils. They exclude all animal products. And so this is a concept where you can simply eat as much as you want. You don't count calories. You don't count portions. And it just relies on that, the concept that I talked about here, this concept of calorie density. And so you just eat until you're satisfied and enjoy your food. Very, very simple. So people may say, well, what about the Mediterranean diet? I've heard great things about that. I don't need to adopt a whole food, plant-based way of eating. That may be fine, but it doesn't address the obesity pandemic that we're talking about. As you can see from the graph there, they did this head-to-head study, had the same people in the study. Mediterranean diet had almost no fat loss and no weight loss compared to a plant-based approach, which had significant numbers of those. And the issue is, again, that the Mediterranean diet does emphasize whole plant-based foods, but it actually includes a substantial number of calories from oil. They talk about olive oil and meat and dairy products as well. So a Mediterranean diet is not going to solve our obesity pandemic. So a whole food, plant-based approach, it doesn't require any willpower. It's sustainable. The results that you see, the weight starts to come off very quickly, and so the motivation is very high to continue. It can be adapted to any cultural preference. You don't have to go to a specialty store or anything like that. You can adapt your own cultural foods to this. Many different varieties, flavors, and textures. And it's very affordable. So regardless of income or location, you can generally afford these foods. Not only does this address obesity, but many of its comorbidities as well. For example, heart disease. This is the world's #1 killer. It's killed more people, millions more people, in fact, than COVID has since 2020, but we haven't heard a lot about it. And whole food plant-based nutrition has actually been shown to reverse heart disease in randomized clinical trials. There's no other drug, there's no other surgery that has been shown to do that. And this is the example of that. This is an individual who had very severe heart disease. On the left, you can see their artery is very diseased. They adopted a whole food plant-based way of eating. And in less than 3 years, the artery had totally recovered. You see it's nice and smooth there, how it should look. And so this really demonstrates this reversal that's been shown in numerous studies of heart disease. And it's not just heart disease, it's not just obesity. There is a long list of other chronic health conditions that are worldwide. Diabetes, high blood pressure, arthritis, all of these can be effectively treated and in many cases reversed with a plant-based approach. And so how can we implement these strategies to make this a reality, and what can actuaries do to help out with this? Well, I'm going to talk about 3 strategies that involve financial incentives that I think actuaries are well suited to get behind and help implement. The first is involving healthcare providers. And you can see there on the chart, to treat someone with severe obesity, it's about double the cost for someone that does not have obesity. So if a healthcare provider can help the patient understand this and support them in any way they can and reverse their obesity, there's a significant cost savings that's available there. And so what this would do is pay a portion of this cost savings to the healthcare provider for helping out this patient. And this would continue like an annuity every year as long as the patient would maintain their proper weight. Strategy number 2 revolves around healthcare facilities and the foods that they serve to their patients and staff for that matter. There's a number of reputable organizations that have issued statements on food and health over the past several years. The World Health Organization has declared that processed meats cause cancer. Both the American and Australian Medical Association have called for more plant-based meals in healthcare facilities. And Canada has eliminated dairy as an item on its food guide. But yet a number of in fact, almost all healthcare facilities continue to serve these products that have been deemed, cancerous and other effects. And so what this proposal would do is compensate hospitals who adapt their food systems more in line with these guidelines. They would get more money, for example, for doing certain procedures, and the hospitals who did not comply would get less. Strategy number 3 involves patients and actually providing meals, plant-based meals to them for a period of time to get them transitioned. There's a lot of drugs out there, been in the news lately, costing $14,000, $15,000 a year. Even some of the non-drug approaches are $8,000, whereas to feed somebody free meals for maybe a year costs only $5,000. So we would provide them meals for an introductory period to get them transitioned. So actuaries can help advise governments, employers, insurers, whoever they're working with, about these strategies and how they could implement them, and develop reimbursement systems that I've been talking about for these healthcare facilities, and then demonstrate, that over time that the patients are improving their health and things are moving in the right direction, and that these payers are getting their money back. So, in summary, there's been many attempts to address the obesity pandemic, and none have addressed the root cause, this cause of excess calories. So any successful strategy must address both the excess calories and not require someone to consume less food. Whole food plant-based nutrition is a satisfying and sustainable long-term approach based on decades of research. And consistent with the theme of this Congress, Bridge to Tomorrow, actuaries have this great opportunity. In fact, I feel we have a responsibility to the public, not just to calculate the cost of obesity or raise our premiums, raise our insurance company premiums to provide for it, but really use our skills and knowledge to implement some of these strategies that can make a real difference in people's lives and solve some of these societal problems that really are affecting us in so many ways. So I would encourage you, because this is kind of a different way of addressing certain of these issues that maybe in the past may take a more pure actuarial approach. So I would encourage you to try a whole food plant-based way of eating for 30 days and then evaluate your own results, because unless you actually try it yourself, you really don't understand the power of it. And many people have done this and they were skeptical, but then they tried it, and so it really helps on these discussions with whether you're talking to a hospital or an insurer, or you're involved in a consulting arrangement. So I would encourage you to try that if you can, and it really makes a big difference. So with that, I think we can take some questions.
Well, thank you very much, Ken. Certainly regretting the choice of last night's cheese plate. Thanks for that. So lots of questions coming through, actually. What about the keto diet? What's your view on that? Obviously, quite heavy on fats.
Well, that's quite a bit different than what I'm talking about. I think the main thing with that one is it has shown some very short-term results in terms of people with diabetes, but there, in fact, have not been any long-term studies on that. And I go back to my slide about reversal of heart disease. Heart disease is the #1 killer in the world. It just kills millions of people a year, and I'm sure we've all known someone that's died from a heart attack or a stroke or something like that. And a whole food plant-based approach, eliminating the oils and a lot of the processed foods, has been the only dietary approach, and even not just dietary, but medical approach, whether it's surgery or drugs, that's actually reversed that condition. So the keto protocol and others have not done that. So that's kind of the bottom line on that one.
Okay, thank you. What about, this is an interesting one. Ultra-processed foods may have misaligned our internal hormonal signals. Does the eat until satisfied strategy, could that be ineffectual for some individuals? What could they do to turn that around?
Mm-hmm. I think there are a lot of things in processed foods that, disrupt certain things. I mean, I'm not a doctor, so I can't speak to all the hormones and all that thing. But they, they have shown many times that, if you focus on the whole plant-based foods, you eliminate the processed foods, that your body works very well. It's just a signaling mechanism. And once you've eaten the right amount that's appropriate, you just stop. You don't feel like putting anything in more. So when I say you can eat as much as you want, yes, but you don't want to overdo it. But you'll be satisfied when you've had enough.
Okay, thank you. There's a question here in relation to insurance. So in Australia, there's perhaps some reluctance amongst insurers to rate BMI according to the true risk, due to the impact on, obviously, negative impact on new business flows. Has this also been the case in the US?
rating up on
Well,
BMI?
not strictly rating people for BMI at the underwriting stage, so maybe taking a more lenient approach.
Yeah, I guess I'm not real up on that, so yeah.
Sure, sure. Okay. There's a question here about normalizing body image of being overweight in society. Slightly controversial, but do you think that contributes to the problem?
I don't know that it contributes to the problem. I mean, I think obviously dealing with obesity can be a sensitive topic, and my view is that it's nobody's fault. A lot of physicians have not been trained in nutrition and how effective it can be, and unless you've really been trained in it and been, whether if you're a physician or if you're a patient, if you have not been given the information from your physician or a dietitian or somebody like that, you don't know. It's not your fault, and so I don't think we want to assign any blame or anything like that. It's just unfortunate that the message has not been out there, how this approach can be used, and so that's one of the things. We have this organization called Actuaries for Sustainable Healthcare, and we've tried to get the word out among our colleagues in the actuarial profession that this is a legitimate approach that people can use rather than very expensive drugs and very expensive surgeries, and it's things that governments can use and insurers can use, and it's very, very low cost approach. So
cool, thank you. We might take one more and then go to the more general questions, because we've got a few questions that have come through from the previous sessions too. So there's a growing market for plant-based meat replacements. These seem to be higher calories than meat. Are they better or worse for weight loss?
yes, that's a common concern. There are as many products out there that are labeled plant-based, and the view seems to be these are very good for transition type foods. So if you are just want to try this out and experiment a little bit, that's maybe something you can use in the very beginning to get away from the true animal products. But for any more than just a trial period, maybe a week or two, that's not something that's really going to contribute to health, because those are really very highly processed. As you mentioned, some of the fat content, the sodium content, and different things are equal or could be worse than the animal products themselves. So it's more of a transition food, but long term, what the data shows is if you focus on the whole foods made from actual whole fruits, whole vegetables, whole grains, and so forth, and away from those industrial type products, that's really the approach that will reverse obesity and heart disease and some of these other conditions.
Mm-hmm. Actually, we've got time for one more before we go to some of the other questions, which is traditional medical advice continues to follow a calories in versus calories out, exercise more, eat less narrative. And it's been slow to adopt the strategies outlined in the presentation. How can insurers step in to provide this sort of guidance to policyholder?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think insurers have a very key role to play. I mean, they can communicate with their policyholders. Hopefully the policyholders trust them. Right now, you do get that advice from insurers to, about exercise and diet and calories and things like that. So I think we as actuaries, if we can educate our employers in terms of what the evidence really says, I think that insurers have that capability to do that and reach their policyholders. So, there's a lot of data out there. I've got some resources. This is not advancing, but anyway, there's some websites you can go to and right there, and there's a lot of scientific papers that you can read and present to your employers if you work for an insurer or a government. And if they can incorporate some of that in the communications to policyholders, I think that would go a long way.